My sister excluded me from the family cruise, so I cashed out. The trust pulled my name from loans and let it collapse alone. My sister said, "We're having a family cruise, but you're not invited." I just smiled and cashed out the family trust. Later, they found that I had pulled my name from the business loan and cut off every payment I'd set up. A week later, my dad's lawyer called nonstop begging me, "We're on the verge of losing everything. Please, we need to talk." I should have known better than to show up at one of my parents' family dinners. They always felt more like a performance than a reunion, the clinking of wine glasses, the overly loud laughter, and my sister holding court as if she were the queen of a small, overpriced kingdom. I was 2 sips into a glass of wine when my sister Rebecca leaned in from across the table, her grin sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, Peter, we wanted to tell you something." The room quieted just enough for me to feel the weight of every pair of eyes around the table. I looked at my parents. My dad pretended to concentrate on his plate, while my mom suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. That should have been my first clue. "We're going on a family cruise," she said, drawing out each word as if she were revealing some great secret. She let it hang in the air for a second, just long enough for me to wonder why I hadn't heard about it before. Then she hit me with the punchline, "But you're not invited." She sat back clearly pleased with herself and took a sip of her drink. A few scattered chuckles broke the silence, mostly from her fiancé, who I'm convinced laughs at everything she says to stay in her good graces. My parents exchanged a quick, guilty look, but still said nothing. I just stared at them for a moment, letting the words sink in. I felt a flicker of embarrassment, maybe even a little hurt, but I quickly buried it under a forced, tight-lipped smile. I'd learned to pick my battles years ago, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "Nice," I managed to say, raising my glass slightly before taking another sip. I caught my aunt's sympathetic glance from across the table. She'd always been the only one to question my parents' double standards, but this time, even she held her tongue. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of small talk and clinking silverware. I tuned out most of it, my mind already on the long list of financial favors I'd done for my family over the years, the mortgage payments I'd helped cover, the business loans I'd co-signed, the unexpected medical bills I'd quietly paid without ever being asked. I'd been their safety net for years, and this was the thanks I got. As I was leaving, my uncle met me at the door. He put a firm hand on my shoulder and leaned in. "Don't let them get to you, Peter. You're better than this." I forced a weak smile, mumbled something like, "Yeah, I know," and stepped out into the cool night air. I drove home in silence, the roads mostly empty. My sister's words replaying in my mind, each repetition stinging a little more. I went into my house, threw my jacket over the back of a chair, and just stood there for a moment in the dark. The only sound was my slow, deliberate breathing. And then, without really thinking, I walked over to my desk, fired up my laptop, and pulled up my family's joint business account. My parents had made me a co-signer years ago, when they needed help securing a line of credit for their small real estate business. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. After all, family helps family, right? I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. All the payments I'd set up, the automatic transfers, the line of credit, I'd guaranteed, it all sat there, my name tied to every cent. I felt a bitter, simmering anger building in my chest, and for the first time in years, I decided I was done. I withdrew every cent of my contribution, removed my name from the accounts, and canceled every automatic payment I'd set up. They wanted to take a family vacation without me. Fine, they could have a family business without me too. I closed the laptop and sat back, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of control. It was a small, sharp victory, but it would do for now. I poured myself another glass of wine, sat back on my couch, and let the silence fill the room. This was only the beginning. 2 days later, the calls started. At first, it was just my dad, his name flashing on my phone screen as I poured my morning coffee. I let it ring. Then, my mom tried her number popping up as I settled into my work emails. Ignored. By lunch, both had left long, rambling voicemails, their tones shifting from confused to mildly panicked. That evening, I received a text message from my sister. "Peter, WTF. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Did you do something with the business account?" I grinned through my phone on the couch and took a long, satisfying sip of my drink. Let them sweat for a while. They'd gotten used to treating me like their financial backstop, assuming I'd always be there to fix their mistakes. It was time for them to see what life was like without their favorite doormat. The next morning, I finally decided to check my messages. My dad's voicemail was a predictable mix of confusion and irritation. He still thought of me as the quiet, reliable son who wouldn't dare push back. Peter, it's Dad. I just checked the accounts and, something's wrong. Our payments aren't going through, and the account is empty. Call me as soon as possible. My mother's message had a sharper edge. Peter, this is serious. Your dad is stressed and we can't reach you. You need to fix this. Call us. I leaned back in my chair and let their desperate voices wash over me. It felt like a slow rolling wave of long overdue justice. I'd been their safety net for so long that they'd forgotten I was a person with limitations, not just a name on a bank account. By the end of the week, their texts had become desperate. They had a meeting with their lender coming up, and without my contributions, the numbers didn't add up. Their business, the one they proudly showed off at family gatherings as a testament to hard work and smart decisions, was suddenly on the brink. I knew it wasn't just the missed payments. I'd also quietly removed my name from the business loan I'd co-signed for them, the one they'd used to expand their real estate portfolio. Without my backing, the bank was going to take a much closer look at their finances. Then on Friday night, as I was debating whether to crack open a beer or pour myself a glass of whiskey, my phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. I let it ring a few times before I picked it up, already guessing who it might be. Peter, this is Michael, your dad's lawyer. His voice had that strained, overly polite tone that lawyers use when they're about to ask you to clean up a mess. I've been trying to reach you all week. We need to talk. Your parents are about to lose everything. We need to work this out. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the satisfaction sink in. I'd been their quiet, overlooked cash cow for years, but now they were finally feeling what it was like to be on their own. I let him talk for a while, listening to the increasingly desperate pleas. When he finally paused, clearly expecting me to offer a solution, I gave only a short, clipped response. I'll think about it. Then I hung up, threw my phone on the couch, and sat back, letting the silence fill the room. That was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to 15 missed calls and a barrage of texts. My sister's messages had gone from annoyed to downright angry. Peter, answer your damn phone. Mom's losing it. You can't just disappear like this. Fix it. I sat back sipping my coffee as I scrolled through the frantic messages. I imagined her pacing around her overpriced condo, too panicked to enjoy the view of the city skyline she could never have afforded without my help. Then came the email from my dad. It was a mess of barely contained desperation, filled with phrases like family trust, misunderstanding, and just a rough patch. He even tried to make me feel guilty by mentioning that family sticks together in tough times. I almost laughed. For years I'd been their problem solver, the one they counted on to keep the wheels turning when they got too close to the edge. And now that I'd finally pulled the plug, they were in a tailspin. But the real surprise came later that afternoon. I had just finished a run and was stretching in my living room when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, half expecting my sister, or maybe my father, but it was my uncle, the one who had pulled me aside at the family dinner. I opened the door, my pulse quickening. He gave me a small, tight smile and stepped inside, brushing off my half-hearted apology for the mess. Peter, he said, sitting down on my couch without waiting for an invitation. I've been hearing things. Your parents are in a bad way, and your sister seems to be losing her mind. He leaned forward, fixing me with a steady, almost approving gaze. I'm guessing that's no coincidence. I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but he wasn't fooled. You finally cut them off, didn't you? I hesitated, then gave a brief nod. Yeah, figured it was time. He let out a low chuckle and shook his head. About damn time. I blinked a little surprised. This was the same uncle who had always played the mediator at family gatherings, the one who smoothed over the awkward silences and tried to keep everyone civil. He leaned back and crossed his arms. Look, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but you did the right thing. They've been leaning on you for too long. It's time for them to stand on their own 2 feet. I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication. He wasn't judging me. If anything, he seemed impressed. Before he left, he gave me a firm handshake and one last piece of advice. Don't give in, Peter. They need this wake-up call. And you deserve to live your life without being their safety net. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe this wasn't just about revenge. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. A few days later, I was sitting in my home office halfway through my morning coffee when my phone started vibrating on my desk. I looked at the screen, another unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Peter! My father's voice came over the line, strained and shaky, the kind of tone I hadn't heard from him in years. Son, we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair and let a small, bitter smile creep across my face. I pictured him in his cluttered office, stacks of unpaid bills and foreclosure notices piled around him, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of his own mistakes. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my tone flat. He hesitated, and I could practically hear him wrestling with his pride on the other end. "Look, I know things have been tense. Maybe we've relied on you a little too much over the years, but we're family. We stick together. That's what families do." I felt a flicker of something. Maybe it was the ghost of the loyalty that had bound me to them for so long, but I quickly choked it down. "We're in a bad spot." He continued, his voice dropping to a raspy whisper, as if afraid someone might overhear his shame. "The bank is threatening to foreclose on our properties. If we can't make the payments, we'll lose everything." I remained silent, letting him stew in his discomfort. He had never been one to apologize, and I wasn't about to let him off the hook now. "Peter," he said again, his voice cracking slightly, "your mother's a wreck, and your sister, well, you know how she is. She's not taking it well." I almost laughed. The same sister who had smugly disinvited me from her precious family vacation. The same one who had spent years living off my hard work and savings, never once thinking about what it cost me. I could only imagine her panicking as she realized her safety net had finally been torn away. "Why are you telling me this?" I said, carefully keeping my voice neutral. There was a long, painful silence on the other end. I imagined him sitting there, his jaw clenched, his free hand running through his thinning hair as he struggled to swallow his pride. "Because we need your help, son." He finally managed the words, coming out stiff and unnatural, like he was pulling them out of his throat with pliers. "We can't do this without you." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dust motes drifting lazily through the slant of sunlight coming through my window. "You mean you can't do it without my money?" I replied, my tone colder than I intended. He stammered, clearly taken by surprise. "That's not fair, Peter. We've always been a team. You know that. A team." I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. "You mean the kind of team where I pay the bills, co-sign the loans, and pick up the pieces every time you and Mom overextend yourselves? That kind of team." He fell silent, the dead air crackling between us. For a second, I felt a pang of guilt, a ghost of the old me trying to claw its way back, the version of me that would have bent over backwards to fix this mess just to keep the peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. "I'm sorry you're in this situation," I finally said, my voice steady. "But maybe this is the wake-up call you all need." He tried to answer, but I'd already pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the red button, cutting him off mid-sentence, and threw the phone on the desk. It vibrated once more before going silent. That night, I poured myself a stiff drink and stepped out onto my back porch, the cool air biting my skin as I leaned against the railing. I looked up at the stars, their cold, indifferent lights spilling across the dark sky. For the first time in years, I felt free, my life no longer weighed down by their endless demands and expectations. I took a slow sip, the whiskey burning a pleasant trail down my throat, and let the silence fill me. A week passed. The calls slowed, then stopped altogether. My phone, once a constant source of guilty messages and financial demands, had gone silent. I never realized how heavy the absence of their demands would feel, like a long, slow exhalation after years of holding my breath. Then, one afternoon, as I walked back to my car after lunch, I noticed a familiar figure leaning against the hood, my sister Rebecca. She looked different, more disheveled, less polished. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled, and her clothes, though still expensive, had the slightly rumpled look of someone who hadn't slept well. She straightened up as I approached, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Peter," she said, her tone sharper than I'd expected. "Rebecca," I replied, keeping my voice calm. She let out a frustrated sigh and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "What the hell is going on with you?" I leaned against the side of my car and crossed my arms. "You're going to have to be a little more specific." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. You took your name off the loan. You stopped making payments. You put Mom and Dad in a terrible position." I felt a flicker of old resentment rise, memories of her smug smile at that dinner flashing through my mind. "They put themselves in that position," I said evenly. "I just stopped cleaning up their mess." She threw up her hands, her composure slipping further. "You can't just walk away. We're family." I chuckled, the sound colder than I intended. "Funny, that wasn't the vibe I got at the family dinner when you uninvited me from the cruise." She winced just for a second, but it was enough. "Peter, come on," she said, her voice softening. "We didn't mean anything by it. You know how we are. It was just a joke. I felt a surge of something close to pity, but I quickly suppressed it. I'd spent too many years being the reliable one, the one they leaned on only to be discarded when I was no longer convenient. I bailed you out more times than I can count, I said, keeping my voice level. I co-signed your condo loan, paid for your car repairs, covered your credit card bills, and never once asked for a thank you. But the one time I say no, the one time I decide to put myself first, I'm the bad guy. She opened her mouth, then closed it clearly, struggling to find an answer. For once, the girl who always had a snappy comeback was at a loss for words. Finally, she let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping. What do you want me to say, Peter? I looked into her eyes and felt a strange, unfamiliar calm settle over me. I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to understand that this isn't my problem anymore. It's yours. With that, I stepped around her, unlocked my car, and got in. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, standing there alone. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself, the weight of years of family entitlement finally crashing down on her. As I rounded the corner, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly chosen myself. Months passed. The silence from my family, once a heavy, uncomfortable thing, had become a strange kind of peace. My phone had stopped lighting up with frantic texts and guilt-ridden voicemails, and I'd begun to rediscover the quiet satisfaction of living on my own terms. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving the gym, I saw a familiar name flash across my phone screen, my aunt. She was the one relative who had always been a bit of a bridge between me and the rest of the family. So I picked up. "Hey, Peter," she said, her voice warm but with a hint of nervousness. "Are you free this weekend? I'm having a little family reunion, just a few of us. It would mean a lot if you could come." I hesitated, feeling that old reflexive urge to say no. I'd finally broken free of their grip. Did I really want to risk being pulled back in? But something in her tone caught my attention, a mixture of hope and concern I hadn't heard in a long time. "Sure," I said, surprising myself. "I'll come." As I pulled into her driveway that Saturday, I noticed my parents' car parked next to my sister's shiny white SUV. My first instinct was to turn around and leave. But before I could, my aunt stepped out onto the porch and waved me over with a big smile. She pulled me into a warm hug as soon as I reached the steps, whispering a quick, "Thanks for coming," before leading me inside. The atmosphere was different, quieter, almost tentative. My parents were sitting in the living room, their postures less rigid than I remembered. My sister was at the kitchen counter nervously arranging a fruit platter, her polished, perfectly manicured facade showing the slightest cracks. "Peter," my father said, standing up as I entered the room. He looked thinner, his usual air of confidence replaced by something closer to humility. My mother gave me a tight, insecure smile. I took a deep breath and forced myself to relax. As I sat down in one of the chairs, my aunt quickly handed me a drink. For a few minutes we made awkward small talk, the kind where everyone's trying to act normal, but the tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. I caught my sister stealing quick glances at me. Her jaw clenched clearly, still trying to decide how to play this. Then, just as I was beginning to think of a polite excuse to leave, my father cleared his throat. "Peter." He began, his eyes fixed on the glass in his hand. "I know we took advantage of you more than we should have, and I can't undo that, but I want to at least try to make things right." I put down my glass and leaned forward slightly. This was a side of my father I wasn't used to seeing, vulnerable, uncertain, almost afraid. He took a shaky breath. "After you cut us off, we had to face some hard truths about our finances, about how we treated you. And well, it forced us to change." My mother, who had been nervously twisting the bracelet on her wrist, chimed in. "We sold 2 of the rental properties, paid off some of the debt. We even took a course in financial management." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "We're trying to stand on our own now." I glanced at my sister, half expecting a sarcastic comment, but instead she just looked down at her drink, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she looked up and met my eyes for the first time. "I'm sorry, Peter, for everything. I took you for granted and didn't realize how much I leaned on you until you cut me off." She hesitated, then added, "I even started paying my own mortgage for the first time in my life." I blinked, genuinely surprised. I had half expected her to try to guilt me back into my old role, to manipulate me into becoming her safety net again, but this felt real. My father leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "I know it doesn't make up for everything, but we want to be better. We'll try to do better." A silence fell over the room, heavy, but different from the stifling tension of past family gatherings. This felt more like the calm after a storm, the kind where the air is clearer, the edges of everything sharper. For a moment, I considered all the years I'd spent cleaning up their messes, all the sacrifices I'd made to keep them afloat. And for the first time, I felt a glimmer of something close to hope. Maybe this really had been the wake-up call they needed. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, my voice steady. "I really do. But you have to understand I can't go back to being the guy who fixes everything for you. I have my own life now, and I intend to live it on my own terms." My dad nodded, his jaw tight, but his eyes strangely bright, as if he was struggling to hold back a wave of emotion. My mother reached out and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "We understand," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "We really do." As the evening wore on, the tension began to ease. My aunt served dinner. My father cracked a few awkward jokes, and my sister for once seemed genuinely interested in my life outside of their drama. As I drove home that night, the moon hanging low over the quiet streets, I felt a strange, tentative sense of peace. I had finally drawn the line, and they had finally learned to respect it. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had a real family again, imperfect, flawed, but finally learning to stand on their own. As I drove away from that last family gathering, the night air rushing through the open window, something inside me finally cracked open, not with anger, but with a strange, quiet relief. For years I had carried their expectations like a second skin, the good son, the reliable one, the wallet they could dip into whenever life got inconvenient. I had told myself it was love, that family meant sacrifice, that my silence was strength. But standing in my aunt's driveway, watching my father's shoulders slump and my sister avoid my eyes, I understood the truth I had been too afraid to face. They had never seen me. Not really. They had seen a role, a function, a safety net they assumed would always be there. And the moment I refused to play that part anymore, the mask slipped. The laughter at the dinner table turned into panic. The casual cruelty of "you're not invited" became desperate voicemails and pleading emails. It was ugly, raw, and heartbreaking, but it was also the clearest proof I had ever been given that I mattered. Not because of what I could give them, but because of what happened when I stopped. I cried that night alone on my balcony with a glass of whiskey I barely touched. Not tears of regret, but of release. I cried for the boy who thought being useful was the only way to be loved. I cried for the young man who paid bills and co-signed loans and swallowed every insult just to keep the peace. I cried because I had finally chosen myself, and it hurt like hell, but it also felt like coming home. The next morning, I woke up lighter. The house was quiet. My phone stayed silent. And for the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like freedom. I started small, a solo trip to the coast, long walks with no one to answer, to dinners cooked just for me. I rediscovered parts of myself I had buried under their needs, my love of photography, my quiet sense of humor, the way I could sit in stillness without feeling guilty. Looking back, I don't hate them. I pity them a little, maybe. But mostly, I feel grateful. Because their betrayal forced me to build something stronger than blood ties: self-respect. Boundaries. A life that belongs to me alone. I still love them in the complicated way you love people who shaped you, even if they hurt you. I just don't love them enough to let them hurt me anymore. And that, I think, is the truest form of forgiveness I can give both to them and to myself. I'm not the villain in their story anymore. I'm the hero of my own. And damn, it feels good to finally write the ending I deserve.